The folded flag was clutched in my hands as they lowered my father's casket into the ground, but no one would meet my eyes. I stood alone at the edge of the military cemetery, watching as high-ranking officers consoled my stepmother and half-brothers. Private Maxwell's only daughter couldn't make it, my stepmother was saying to the funeral director, her voice carrying across the manicured grounds, too busy with her worthless life to honor her father. You know how these millennial girls are, selfish to the core. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The betrayal felt like shrapnel to my chest, stealing my breath. I'd flown 14 hours straight from my deployment in South Korea after receiving the call about Dad's passing. Captain Rivera had given me all the details. Arlington National Cemetery at 10 a.m. I wanted to be there despite my family's attempts to keep me away, my service uniform still crisp from the flight, only to find myself treated like an unwelcome stranger. The honor guard captain moved to intercept me as I stood frozen near a row of headstones. "Name?" he asked, clipboard in hand. "Sergeant First Class Elena Maxwell." I whispered, my real name feeling foreign on my tongue as I watched my stepmother receive the sympathies meant for our entire family. "Master Sergeant James Maxwell's daughter." He scanned his list, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You're not on the family clearance list." Not on the list for my own father's funeral. My father who had raised me alone after my mother died when I was 6. My father who had beamed with pride at my basic training graduation. My father whose bronze star I wore pinned to my uniform today. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice stronger now. "I'm his only daughter. I'm active duty Army, just like he was." The captain's eyes softened with sympathy, but his stance remained firm. "I understand, ma'am, but I have strict instructions about who's permitted in the family section. Perhaps you can pay your respects after the ceremony?" I stepped back, the reality sinking in. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. My stepmother Vanessa had finally achieved what she'd been working toward for 15 years, erasing me completely from my father's life. Now she was erasing me from his death too. "My name is Elena. I'm 28 and a combat engineer with the United States Army. This is the story of how I reclaimed my father's legacy and my rightful place in his story. A story that would end with an honor guard firing 3 volleys from their rifles in perfect unison, a 21-gun salute that would change everything. I'd spent the last 4 years stationed overseas, trying to follow in my father's footsteps, while maintaining the fragile peace with what remained of my family. We'd speak on video calls when he could manage it without Vanessa hovering in the background. He'd send me coded emails about his health, that I now realized had been hiding how serious his cancer had become. "You're living the life he wanted for himself," my father's old Army buddy Frank had told me the last time I was stateside. "That terrifies people who've built their lives on his sacrifices." What I didn't know was how methodically Vanessa had been erasing me from the narrative. The Christmas video calls where my invitation to come home mysteriously failed to send. The family photos where everyone wore matching sweaters I'd never been told about. The subtle rumors to my father's military friends about my instability and attention-seeking behavior. The final blow had been changing my father's emergency contact from me to her eldest son, who had never served a day in uniform. I pressed my back against a massive oak tree, hands trembling as I pulled out my phone. Through the scattered mourners I could see my father's casket draped with the American flag, surrounded by his brothers and sisters in arms, who had come to pay their respects to a legendary senior NCO. My finger hovered over a contact I hadn't called in years. Captain Alexis Rodriguez, my former commanding officer from my first deployment, answered on the 3rd ring. "Maxwell? It's been a minute." "Captain?" My voice cracked. "They won't let me attend my own father's funeral. My stepmother has somehow convinced everyone I'm not even here." The silence stretched before she responded. "Are you absolutely certain? I'm standing outside Arlington right now watching Vanessa accept condolences from Dad's entire battalion while telling everyone I couldn't be bothered to show up." "Don't make a scene," Captain Rodriguez said immediately. "Document everything. I'm across town at the Pentagon, but I can. I don't need you to come I interrupted, surprising myself with the steadiness returning to my voice. I need you to tell me if there's a military protocol being violated here and who I should speak with. Denying immediate family members access to a military funeral is against protocol, she said firmly. Especially another service member. Forward me the funeral details and your father's service information. I'll make some calls. Be patient, Maxwell. That's an order. I ended the call and opened my camera app, zooming in on the scene unfolding by the gravesite. The chaplain was speaking words I couldn't hear from this distance. My stepbrother Marcus gave a eulogy that had Vanessa nodding tearfully. Not once did anyone mention Master Sergeant Maxwell's only daughter, who is currently serving her country, just as he had for 25 years. And through it all, the flag-draped casket sat there, containing the remains of the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had brushed my hair every morning after Mom died, who had written me letters during every deployment even when his own health was failing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. When the main ceremony ended and people began filing out, I noticed a group of older veterans gathering to the side, men wearing Vietnam-era unit pins, my father's original platoon. I recognized some of them from childhood barbecues and reunions. Before they could leave, I straightened my uniform and approached them directly. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice clear and professional despite the emotion threatening to overflow. "I'm Sergeant First Class Elena Maxwell, Master Sergeant Maxwell's daughter." The oldest of them, a tall man with a silver crew cut, squinted at me. "Little Ellie, Jimmy's girl?" His weathered face broke into a surprised smile. "Well, I'll be damned. Look at you, all grown up and in uniform." "You're the spitting image of Jimmy when we were in Quezon," another veteran said, his eyes misting over. "Same determined jaw, same stance." "Vanessa told us you couldn't leave your post," a third man said, confusion evident in his voice. "That you were in some classified location and couldn't get clearance to come home." The lies stung, but I maintained my composure. I was granted emergency leave as soon as I received word of my father's passing. I've been trying to reach out to Vanessa for days. The men exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. These were men who had fought alongside my father, who had saved each other's lives in the jungle decades ago. They could read between the lines. "Something ain't right here," the first veteran said, introducing himself as Sergeant Major Walter Cooper, Ret. "Jimmy talked about you constantly. Proud as hell of his girl following in his footsteps. Never missed a chance to show us your pictures or tell us about your latest achievement." My throat tightened. I wasn't allowed to join the family at the ceremony. They've removed me from the list. Walter's expression hardened. "The hell they did. Boys, we need to fix this. Jimmy Maxwell's daughter is going to say goodbye to her father properly." What happened next was a testament to the unbreakable bond between soldiers. Walter and his friends formed a protective circle around me and marched me directly to where the cemetery director was speaking with the honor guard captain. The confrontation was brief but effective. "This soldier is Master Sergeant Maxwell's daughter and a serving NCO," Walter said, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a former senior enlisted leader. "There has been a grievous mistake, and it will be rectified immediately." The director looked between us, noting my matching surname on my uniform nameplate and the family resemblance that several veterans had already commented on. My father's distinctive hazel eyes, the exact shade of mine, were legendary in his unit. "Of course," the director said after consulting a different list. "Sergeant First Class Maxwell, I see you're listed in Master Sergeant Maxwell's military records as his daughter and primary next of kin. I don't understand how this mix-up occurred. I didn't bother explaining. There would be time for that later. The interment is about to proceed to the final phase," he continued. "Please, join your father's service." As I walked toward the gravesite, I could see Vanessa's face contort with shock and then anger. My stepbrothers shifted uncomfortably. None of them had served, though they often paraded around in veteran-adjacent clothing, claiming vicarious connection to my father's sacrifice. "What is she doing here?" Vanessa hissed loud enough for nearby mourners to hear. "This is a private family ceremony." "I am family," I said simply. my voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "I'm his daughter." "You abandoned him," she spat. "Where were you when he was suffering through chemotherapy, when he needed someone to drive him to appointments?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. I was deployed to a combat zone on his direct advice, serving my country like he taught me to. He told me he was in remission. He told me the cancer was gone. A murmur ran through the assembled mourners. Nearby, Captain Rodriguez had arrived in her dress blues, accompanied by 2 senior officers I didn't recognize. She gave me a subtle nod. "Master Sergeant Maxwell explicitly requested his daughter be present for his final honors," said a stern-faced colonel who stepped forward. "In fact, he filed paperwork with the Army 3 months ago requesting she be the recipient of his flag." Vanessa's face drained of color. "That's impossible. I have all his paperwork. I'm his wife." "And Elena is his daughter and fellow soldier," the colonel replied, unmoved. Master Sergeant Maxwell updated his final wishes through his chain of command. My father had known. Somehow he had known Vanessa would try to exclude me and had taken steps to prevent it. Even in death he was looking out for me. The honor guard captain approached, speaking quietly to the chaplain. After a brief consultation, the chaplain nodded and gestured for everyone to retake their places for the final ceremony. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude today's service, Master Sergeant Maxwell's daughter, Sergeant First Class Elena Maxwell, would like to say a few words." My steps felt leaden as I approached the casket. I hadn't prepared anything, but as I stood there looking at the flag draped over my father's remains, the words came naturally. "My father once told me that there are 2 types of courage in this world," I began, my voice clear and steady. "The courage to run toward danger when others flee from it, and the courage to live by your principles even when it would be easier not to." He exemplified both. I looked around at the gathered mourners, meeting the eyes of those who had known him longest. Many of you knew my father as Master Sergeant Maxwell, the decorated combat veteran who earned the Bronze Star for valor in Vietnam, who mentored generations of soldiers, who never left anyone behind. I knew him as Dad, the man who braided my hair every morning after Mom died, who taught me to fish and change a tire, who read me stories about brave warriors, and told me I could be anything I wanted. Tears were flowing freely now among the mourners. Even Vanessa seemed affected, though she kept her gaze fixed on the ground. When I told him I wanted to join the Army, he didn't try to talk me out of it. Instead, he made me promise 3 things: to always do what's right, even when it's hard, to never leave a fellow soldier behind, and to remember that I carry not just my own honor, but the honor of our family name. I placed my hand on the flag-draped casket. "Dad, I promise to keep carrying those principles forward. Your legacy lives on not just in memories or medals, but in the lives you touched and the values you instilled in all of us." As I stepped back, the honor guard moved into position, 7 rifles raised in perfect unison. The first volley cracked through the air, startling nearby birds into flight. The second volley echoed across the hallowed grounds of Arlington. The third volley sealed my father's journey with military precision, 21 shots in total. The traditional salute for a fallen warrior. For my father. Then came the most sacred part of the ceremony. The honor guard meticulously folded the flag that had draped my father's casket, creating the tight triangle that symbolizes the tricorn hats worn by Revolutionary War soldiers. When it was complete, the honor guard captain approached, not Vanessa, but me. "On behalf of the President of the United States Army, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service." My hands trembled as I accepted the folded flag, holding it close to my chest. In that moment, I wasn't just a soldier receiving a ceremonial item, I was a daughter being handed the tangible symbol of her father's life and sacrifice. Vanessa stood frozen, her carefully constructed narrative crumbling around her. The sympathetic glances from the mourners were now directed at me, not her. The story she had crafted, of the absent daughter who didn't care enough to attend, had been exposed as a lie. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Captain Rodriguez approached with the colonel who had intervened earlier. "Sergeant Maxwell, I'm Colonel Harrison. I served with your father during Operation Desert Storm. He spoke of you often and with great pride." "Thank you, sir," I managed, still clutching the flag. "There's something else you should know," he continued. "Your father left specific instructions about his personal effects and memorabilia. He wanted his medals, photographs, and journals to go directly to you. He was quite explicit about it." I glanced toward Vanessa, who was being consoled by her sons. "Does she know?" "She will soon," Colonel Harrison said with a grim smile. "The JAG office has been instructed to contact you about retrieving these items. Your father was thorough in his preparations." Walter Cooper approached, flanked by several of my father's old platoon members. "We're having a proper wake for Jimmy at O'Malley's pub tonight. The kind he would have wanted, with war stories and bad jokes and good whiskey. You're the guest of honor, young lady." For the first time that day, I felt a smile tug at my lips. I wouldn't miss it. As the cemetery emptied, I remained by my father's grave, finally able to have a private moment with him. I knelt on the freshly turned earth, still holding the folded flag. "I made it, Dad," I whispered. "Just like I promised. A little late, but I'm here." A gentle breeze rustled through the countless white headstones surrounding us, carrying with it the distant sound of another ceremony beginning elsewhere in the vast cemetery. Here, among America's fallen heroes, my father had found his final resting place, and I had reclaimed my place as his daughter. That evening at O'Malley's pub, surrounded by men and women who had served alongside my father throughout his distinguished career, I learned the full truth. Vanessa had been systematically isolating my father during his illness, controlling who could visit and screening his calls. She had hidden the severity of his cancer relapse from me, all while positioning her sons as his true legacy. But my father, true to his training, had created a contingency plan. He had confided in his oldest friends, updated his military paperwork, and even recorded video messages for me that Colonel Harrison would deliver in the coming days. "Your dad knew exactly who he could count on," Walter told me over a glass of my father's favorite whiskey. "And he counted on you to carry on the Maxwell name with honor." As the night wore on, filled with stories of my father's bravery and humor and unwavering integrity, I realized something profound. They hadn't just called me nobody at the funeral, they had tried to make me nobody throughout my father's final years. But the 21-gun salute had said otherwise. It had proclaimed to everyone present that Master Sergeant James Maxwell was a warrior who had raised another warrior. That his bloodline and his values continued. In the military tradition, a 21-gun salute is reserved for those who serve with distinction. It's a final acknowledgement of sacrifice and honor. For me, those 21 shots had done something else as well. They had cut through the lies and manipulations. They had restored my rightful place in my father's story. The flag rested on the table before me, perfectly folded, a silent testament to my father's life and our unbreakable bond. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of collecting his personal effects and ensuring his true wishes were honored. But tonight, surrounded by those who had known him best, I was simply a daughter mourning her father and celebrating the legacy he had entrusted to me. A legacy that no one could ever take away again. The morning after my father's funeral dawned with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The folded flag sat on my hotel nightstand, a silent sentinel watching over me as I prepared for the battles ahead. I knew collecting my father's personal effects wouldn't be as simple as showing up with the JAG office's paperwork. Vanessa would fight. She always did. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I dressed carefully in my ASUs, each medal and ribbon a testament to my own service and a reflection of the legacy my father had built. The bronze star pinned to my chest, identical to the one my father had earned decades ago, felt heavier today, not a burden, but a responsibility. The drive to my childhood home in Alexandria was both familiar and foreign. The streets hadn't changed, but I had. 4 deployments and countless missions had hardened me in ways civilian life never could. Still, as I turned onto Maple Avenue, a wave of memories washed over me. Riding bikes with neighborhood kids, Dad teaching me to throw a baseball in the front yard, standing on the porch in my first uniform while he beamed with pride. Vanessa's luxury SUV sat in the driveway alongside two other expensive vehicles I didn't recognize. Reinforcements, no doubt. I parked my modest rental car at the curb and gathered my documents. The JAG office had been explicit. Master Sergeant Maxwell's military memorabilia, journals, photographs, and medals were legally designated to come to me. The rest of his estate would be distributed according to his will, which would be read tomorrow. Before I could reach the front door, it swung open. Vanessa stood framed in the doorway, her carefully maintained appearance showing cracks from yesterday's confrontation. Behind her loomed her sons, Marcus and Daniel, both in their 30s and both looking uncomfortable in ill-fitting suits. "What are you doing here?" Vanessa demanded, blocking the entrance. "Haven't you caused enough distress already?" I maintained my military bearing, spine straight and shoulders back. "I'm here for my father's personal effects, as specified in his formal instructions to the Army. I have the documentation right here." I held out the folder containing the paperwork, but she made no move to take it. "This is still my house," she said, her voice rising. "You can't just show up and start making demands the day after I buried my husband." "The day after we buried my father," I corrected her gently. "I'm not here to argue, Vanessa. I'm following his explicit wishes." Marcus stepped forward, attempting to appear intimidating, despite never having faced anything more dangerous than a corporate boardroom. "Mom's been through enough. Whatever this is can wait." "It's waited long enough," came a voice from behind me. I turned to find Colonel Harrison approaching from his car, accompanied by a woman in a crisp business suit carrying a briefcase. "Mrs. Maxwell," Colonel Harrison said formally, "this is Captain Jennifer Lang from the Judge Advocate General's office. She's here to ensure Master Sergeant Maxwell's final instructions are carried out according to military protocol." Vanessa's confidence faltered visibly. "This is a family matter, not a military one. For a career serviceman like Master Sergeant Maxwell, there's no separation," Captain Lang replied, her tone professional but firm. "His service to this country extends to how his military effects are handled after his passing. We're simply here to honor his wishes." The legal weight of the military's involvement seemed to register with Vanessa and her sons. They exchanged glances before reluctantly stepping aside to allow us entry. The house I had grown up in was nearly unrecognizable inside. Gone were my father's modest furnishings, replaced by expensive modern pieces that looked uncomfortable and rarely used. The walls, once covered in family photos, including many of me, now displayed generic artwork and a few carefully curated pictures of Vanessa with my father, along with her sons. "Master Sergeant Maxwell's office is through here," Vanessa said stiffly, leading us down the hallway. My father's home office had always been his sanctuary, the one place in the house where his military career and family history were proudly displayed. As we entered, I felt a surge of relief. This room, at least, remained largely as I remembered it. The walls still held his shadow boxes containing medals from Vietnam and Desert Storm. His unit photos still stood on the bookshelves. His old field desk from his days as a young NCO still sat in the corner. According to Master Sergeant Maxwell's instructions, Captain Lang began consulting her documents. "The following items are to be transferred to his daughter, Sergeant First Class Elena Maxwell. All military awards, decorations, and certificates. All photographs, all journals and personal writings, his field desk and its contents, his collection of military books, and all memorabilia related to his service." Vanessa's face tightened. "That's practically everything in this room. This is ridiculous." "These were your husband's explicit wishes, documented and notarized 3 months ago," Captain Lang replied calmly. "Do you wish to contest them?" The threat was subtle but clear. Contesting would mean a legal battle with the United States Army, a fight Vanessa was unlikely to win. "Fine," she said after a long moment. "Take what's on the list." "But nothing else." Colonel Harrison turned to me. "Sergeant Maxwell, we've arranged for appropriate transportation for these items. Why don't you begin identifying what falls under the specified categories?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next 2 hours were a methodical inventory of my father's military life. Each medal told a story of courage under fire. Each photograph captured moments with brothers and sisters in arms spanning decades of service. His journals, dozens of them, chronicled not just his military experiences but his thoughts on leadership, country, and family. As I carefully packed these treasures, I noticed something odd about the field desk. The dimensions seemed slightly off from what I remembered. I ran my fingers along the edges, recalling how my father had once shown me the desk's secret compartment, a small space behind a false panel where he kept his most precious items. Excusing myself from the watchful eyes of Vanessa and her sons, I discreetly examined the desk while Colonel Harrison engaged them in conversation about funeral expenses. My fingers found the hidden catch, just as Dad had shown me years ago. The false panel slid open silently, revealing a small leather-bound book and a sealed envelope, with my name written in my father's distinctive handwriting. I slipped both items into my pocket before continuing with the inventory. Whatever messages my father had left me, they were meant for my eyes alone. By mid-afternoon, everything had been carefully packed and loaded into the military vehicle Colonel Harrison had arranged. Vanessa maintained her icy demeanor throughout, speaking only when necessary and watching me with undisguised resentment. As I prepared to leave, she finally broke her silence. "You think this makes you special? Swooping in at the last minute to claim your prizes?" I met her gaze steadily. "I never wanted prizes, Vanessa. I just wanted to be allowed to love my father." "Love?" she scoffed. "You abandoned him when he needed you most." "I was serving my country on his advice," I replied evenly. "But we both know that's not the real issue here." Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I know what you did," I said quietly. "I know you intercepted my letters. I know you blocked my calls when I tried to reach him during my last deployment. I know you told him I was too busy to visit when I was actually begging for leave to see him." The color drained from her face, but she quickly recovered. "You can't prove any of that." "Maybe not," I conceded, "but I don't need to. Dad figured it out on his own. Why else would he have gone to such lengths to ensure I received these items?" Before she could respond, I turned to go, pausing only to add one final truth. "He may have been your husband, but he was my father first. Nothing will ever change that." The drive back to my hotel was silent, my mind swimming with the enormity of what had transpired. Colonel Harrison had offered to have the items stored at Fort Belvoir until I returned to my duty station, but I had declined. These pieces of my father were coming with me, one way or another. In the privacy of my hotel room, I finally allowed myself to examine the hidden items from the desk. The leather book turned out to be a journal unlike the others, more personal, less focused on military matters. It began 3 years ago, around the time of his initial cancer diagnosis. "Elena," the first entry began, "if you're reading this, then my suspicions were correct and Vanessa has been intercepting our communications. I've tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, but too many coincidences have piled up. Your letters arrive opened. My phone mysteriously resets when you call. The care packages you send arrive damaged or disappear altogether." My throat tightened as I continued reading. Page after page documented his growing awareness of Vanessa's manipulations, his failed attempts to confront her, and his deteriorating health that left him increasingly dependent on her care. "I won't allow her to erase you from my life," he wrote in an entry dated just 4 months ago. "I've made arrangements with my old friend Colonel Harrison. No matter what happens, you will know the truth. You will receive what rightfully belongs to you. And most importantly, you will know that I never stopped being proud of you, never stopped loving you, never believed the lies she spread about you." Tears blurred my vision as I set down the journal and opened the sealed envelope. Inside was a letter and a small key. "My dearest Elena." The letter began in my father's familiar handwriting, now shakier than I remembered. "By the time you read this, I will be gone. Cancer has taken its toll, and the doctors say I have little time left. I've made peace with that. What I cannot make peace with is the thought of you believing I didn't want you by my side." The letter went on to explain that he had tried repeatedly to reach me through unofficial channels when he realized Vanessa was controlling his communications. He had even attempted to travel to my base when I was stateside, only to be hospitalized with complications before he could make the trip. "The enclosed key opens a safe deposit box at First Virginia Bank on King Street," the letter continued. "Inside you'll find my original will, Not the one Vanessa believes is valid, along with evidence I've gathered of her systematic campaign to separate us. There are also items from your mother that I've kept safe all these years, waiting for the right time to pass them on to you." The letter concluded with words that broke and healed my heart simultaneously. "You are my greatest achievement, Elena. Not the medals or the rank or the missions accomplished, but you, the strong, principled woman you've become. Carry on with courage and integrity, as you always have. Know that I see you. I have always seen you, even when others tried to make you invisible. All my love, eternally, Dad." Sleep eluded me that night as I read and reread my father's journal and letter. By dawn, I had formulated a plan. The will reading was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the offices of Williams and Hoffman, the law firm that had handled my father's legal affairs for decades. Before that, I had a stop to make. First Virginia Bank opened at 9 a.m. The manager, a former Army captain himself, recognized my name immediately. "Sergeant Maxwell," he said warmly. "Your father spoke of you often. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you," I replied, presenting the key and my identification. "I believe he left something for me here." The safe deposit box contained exactly what my father had promised: a notarized will dated just 6 months ago, a thumb drive labeled evidence, a small jewelry box containing my mother's wedding rings and locket, and a sealed envelope marked "for the attorney's eyes only," to be opened at the reading of this will. I left the bank with renewed purpose, stopping only to make copies of the will and transfer the contents of the thumb drive to my laptop. What I found was more comprehensive than I could have imagined. Screenshots of intercepted emails, recorded phone conversations where Vanessa explicitly lied about my whereabouts, and a detailed timeline of her systematic campaign to isolate my father from me. At precisely 1:45 p.m., I arrived at Williams and Hoffman. I was directed to a conference room where Mr. Gerald Williams, my father's longtime attorney, was preparing his documents. He was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Sergeant Maxwell," he greeted me, extending his hand. "I wasn't certain you would be joining us today." "You were expecting me?" I asked, surprised. A shadow crossed his face. "I sent the notification to your military email address as your father instructed, but I received a response saying you were unavailable for the foreseeable future and to proceed without you." Another of Vanessa's manipulations, no doubt. "Mr. Williams, I need to speak with you privately before the others arrive." His eyes narrowed slightly at my serious tone. "Of course." I placed the will and the sealed envelope on the table between us. "My father left these for me to bring today. I believe the will you're planning to read may not be the most current one." Mr. Williams examined the documents carefully, his expression growing increasingly grave. He opened the sealed envelope and read its contents, then looked up at me with newfound resolve. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "Your father apparently suspected his legal paperwork might be compromised. This letter authorizes me to accept this will as his final testament, superseding any other versions. It also requests that I review the evidence on this thumb drive before proceeding." We spent the next 10 minutes reviewing key pieces of evidence my father had compiled. Mr. Williams's professional demeanor remained intact, but I could see the anger building behind his eyes. "I've known your father for 30 years, he said finally. "He was an honorable man who deserved better than this. Rest assured, Sergeant Maxwell, his true wishes will be carried out today." At 2 p.m. sharp, Vanessa arrived with her sons and her own attorney, a slick-looking man with an expensive suit and an overly firm handshake. Their confidence faltered momentarily when they saw me, but they quickly recovered, taking seats across the conference table. "I wasn't aware Elena would be joining us," Vanessa said, her voice honey-sweet for the benefit of Mr. Williams. "As Master Sergeant Maxwell's daughter and only blood relative, Sergeant Maxwell has every right to be here," Mr. Williams replied coolly. "Shall we begin?" What followed was a masterclass in professional devastation. Mr. Williams methodically dismantled the illusion Vanessa had so carefully constructed. He explained that a new will had come to light, one that Master Sergeant Maxwell had prepared in anticipation of potential interference with his legal affairs. This will, dated 6 months ago and properly notarized, supersedes all previous versions. Mr. Williams stated. In it, Master Sergeant Maxwell makes several specific bequests. Vanessa's attorney leaned forward. We've never seen this document. How can we be sure of its authenticity? Mr. Williams smiled thinly. Because, Counselor, your client's fingerprints are all over the conspiracy to hide it. He turned on a screen behind him, displaying the first of many damning pieces of evidence from my father's thumb drive. Master Sergeant Maxwell documented extensively how his previous will was likely compromised. He took extraordinary measures to ensure his true wishes would be known. The color drained from Vanessa's face as the evidence mounted. Emails she had sent posing as my father. Phone recordings of her turning away my calls. Financial records showing how she had systematically diverted my father's military pension into accounts only she controlled. This is absurd, she sputtered finally. James would never. James did. Mr. Williams interrupted firmly. And he left explicit instructions for how his estate should be handled in light of these discoveries. The terms of the will were straightforward. The house would be sold, with proceeds divided equally between me and a veterans support organization my father had volunteered with for years. His military pension benefits that would transfer to a spouse were contingent upon a full investigation into the evidence he had gathered. His savings would primarily come to me, with modest portions designated for his stepchildren. This is fraud, Vanessa's attorney declared. We'll contest this immediately. You're welcome to try, Mr. Williams replied calmly. But be advised that contesting will trigger the automatic submission of all this evidence to the military justice system for investigation of benefits, fraud, identity theft, and interference with military communications, all federal offenses. Master Sergeant Maxwell was quite thorough. The fight drained from Vanessa visibly. She had gambled and lost. My father, even in death, had outmaneuvered her completely. As the meeting concluded, I remained seated, absorbing the full impact of what had transpired. My father hadn't just protected his legacy, he had restored my place in it. He had ensured that the truth would be known. Vanessa paused at the door, her sons already retreating to the elevator. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I glimpsed the naked resentment she had always harbored toward me, the living reminder of my father's first love, my mother. You'll never understand what it was like, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Living in the shadow of his perfect first family, the daughter who could do no wrong, the wife he never stopped loving. In that moment I felt an unexpected pang of compassion for her. You're right, I said softly. I don't understand trying to erase someone instead of making room for them. He had enough love for all of us, Vanessa. That was never the problem. She had no response to that, only a final bitter glance before she walked away. Mr. Williams gathered his papers, watching her departure with evident distaste. Your father predicted exactly how this would unfold, he said. He wanted you to know that he regretted not seeing through her sooner, not protecting your relationship better. He did what he could, I replied, rising to leave. In the end, he made sure the truth came out. That's all that matters. As I walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight, my phone chimed with a message from Walter Cooper. The boys and I are meeting at Jimmy's favorite fishing spot tomorrow at dawn. He'd want you there. Bring your gear if you've got it. If not, I've got an extra rod that's caught plenty of monsters over the years. I smiled, feeling a weight lifting. The battle for my father's legacy was over. Now began the process of honoring it, not just through preserving his memory, but by living according to the principles he had instilled in me. The 21-gun salute that had marked his passing had done more than honor his service. It had heralded the beginning of a new chapter, one where the truth had finally prevailed. Dawn painted the Potomac River in shades of amber and gold, as I made my way down the familiar path to my father's favorite fishing spot. The weight of my newly acquired fishing rod felt right in my hands, not my father's old one as I'd expected, but a gleaming new model Walter had presented to me the night before. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Your dad ordered this for your birthday next month. Walter had explained, his weathered hands carefully passing me the custom-crafted rod with my name engraved on the handle. He asked me to keep it safe until he could give it to you himself. Seems like today's as good a time as any. The morning mist hung low over the water as I approached the clearing where several figures already stood silhouetted against the brightening sky. 6 men from my father's original Vietnam platoon had gathered, each clutching a fishing rod and wearing a variation of what could only be described as my father's signature fishing outfit: khaki vest with too many pockets, worn baseball cap, and comfortable jeans. "There she is," Walter called out, raising a thermos in greeting. "Jimmy's girl, right on time. Military punctuality." "Wouldn't dare be late, sir," I replied with a small smile, accepting the steaming cup of coffee he poured me. Strong and black, just like my father had always made it. The oldest of the group, a wiry man introduced as Doc Simmons, the former combat medic who had saved my father's life at Khe Sanh, studied me with twinkling eyes. "You've got Jimmy's stance. Same way of scanning the tree line before settling in. Once a soldier's kid, always a soldier's kid." We spread out along the riverbank, each finding our preferred position. The ritual of preparing our lines was conducted mostly in companionable silence, punctuated occasionally by a quiet comment or gentle correction of technique. "Your father came here the day before every deployment," Walter said as he helped me select the right lure from his tackle box. Said it centered him, reminded him what he was fighting for: this river, this country, the people he loved. I cast my line into the gently swirling current, watching the lure disappear beneath the surface. "He brought me here after Mom died. I was 6. I didn't understand anything that was happening, but he sat me right on that rock over there and told me that even when people leave us, the places they loved keep a part of their spirit." "Sounds like Jimmy." Doc nodded. He always did have a way of making sense of the hardest things. As the sun rose higher, warming the spring air, the men began to share stories, not the rehearsed, sanitized versions told at formal memorial services, but the raw, honest accounts of who my father had truly been in his younger days. The practical joker who once replaced an unpopular lieutenant's bug spray with sugar water in the jungle. The steadfast friend who carried Doc for 3 miles after he stepped on a punji stick. The natural leader who could motivate exhausted men to keep going with just a few well-chosen words. "Your dad saved my life twice," said a quiet man named Martinez, who had been silently fishing downstream. "Once in Vietnam when he pulled me out of a hot landing zone, and again in '95 when I was drinking myself to death after my divorce. He showed up at my door, packed my bags, and drove me straight to rehab. Sat outside the whole first day because I kept trying to leave." "That sounds like him," I said, adjusting my line. "He never gave up on people he believed in." "Including you," Walter added meaningfully. "Especially you." The conversation turned to my own military career, with the veterans asking informed questions about modern combat engineering and my deployments. They listened intently, offering insights from their own experiences that bridged the decades between our services. "Military changes its weapons, changes its tactics," Doc observed. "But the heart of it stays the same. Young people, far from home, trying to do right by each other and their country." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Around mid-morning, as we paused to eat the sandwiches Walter had brought, Martinez cleared his throat awkwardly. We've been talking, Elena, about Vanessa and what she did." The others grew quiet, exchanging glances. Walter finally spoke for the group. "We should have seen it sooner. The way she isolated Jim over the years, especially after his diagnosis. The way she'd changed the subject whenever your name came up. We failed him on that count. And we failed you. You couldn't have known," I said, but Martinez shook his head. "We're reconnaissance veterans, for Christ's sake. We're trained to spot patterns, to see when something isn't right. But we got comfortable, let ourselves believe what was convenient." He looked me directly in the eyes. "I'm sorry, we all are." The simple apology, offered without excuses, hit me harder than I expected. For years I'd carried the weight of my increasingly strained relationship with my father. blaming myself for not trying harder to break through the walls Vanessa had built. To hear these men, my father's brothers in all but blood, acknowledge that larger forces had been at work lifted a burden I hadn't fully recognized I was carrying. "He knew you all cared," I said finally. "That's why he trusted Walter with the fishing rod, why he documented everything so carefully. He knew when it mattered, you'd help set things right." Doc raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To setting things right?" We all raised our cups. To setting things right. As the morning progressed into afternoon, I finally felt the tug on my line that signaled a bite. The men cheered as I reeled in a respectable bass, its scales gleaming in the sunlight. "Your dad would be proud," Walter said, helping me unhook the fish. First catch, with the new rod. After carefully returning the fish to the river, I noticed Walter exchanging glances with the others. Something unspoken was passing between them. "What is it?" I asked, sensing their hesitation. Walter sighed, reaching into his vest pocket to produce a small envelope. "There's something else Jimmy wanted you to have. We debated whether today was the right time, but I think it is." The envelope contained a single photograph, worn around the edges from handling. It showed my father in his Desert Storm uniform, arm around a much younger Sergeant Cooper. Between them stood a young woman in a flowing white dress, her face glowing with happiness. My mother on her wedding day. "This was the only photo Vanessa didn't find and destroy," Walter explained gently. "Your dad gave it to me for safekeeping years ago, said he had a feeling his memorabilia might mysteriously start disappearing. He wanted to make sure you'd have at least one picture of your mother if the others vanished." I traced my mother's face with a trembling finger. I had so few images of her, just fragmented childhood memories that grew hazier with each passing year. "She was beautiful. Smart as a whip, too," Doc added. "Had your father wrapped around her finger from the day they met. He was never the same after she passed until you were old enough to start showing her spirit," Martinez finished. Same determination. Same way of seeing right through people's nonsense. We fished until the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, the conversation flowing naturally between memories of the past and plans for the future. I shared my upcoming deployment to South Korea, my hopes for eventually moving into training other combat engineers, my dream of perhaps one day teaching military history when my active service concluded. "You know," Walter said thoughtfully as we packed up our gear, "your father left more than just physical things behind. He left a network of people who cared about him, who care about you now. People who care to be reached when needed." The other men nodded in agreement, and I understood the unspoken offer being extended. These were not just my father's old war buddies. They were now my connections, too. My inheritance included not just possessions, but relationships that could sustain me through whatever challenges lay ahead. As we walked back to our vehicles, Doc fell into step beside me. "We're having a proper gathering at Walter's place tonight. Nothing formal, just good food and better stories. Your dad would want you there." I hesitated, thinking of my flight back to Fort Leonard Wood scheduled for the following morning. My leave was nearly over, the business of my father's estate as settled as it could be for now. "I know that look," Doc said with a knowing smile. "Duty calling. But consider this part of your duty too. Carrying on your father's legacy means maintaining the bonds he valued. Just a few hours, the Army can spare you that much." Walter's home was a comfortable suburban ranch house filled with military memorabilia and family photos. His wife Grace, a retired Army nurse, welcomed me with a warm embrace that somehow conveyed both sympathy and celebration. "James talked about you constantly," she said, leading me inside where a dozen people had already gathered. "Every promotion, every achievement. That man kept a scrapbook of news clippings about your unit's engineering projects that would put a proud kindergarten parent to shame." The gathering was unlike any memorial event I'd ever attended. There was laughter, genuine, full-bodied laughter as stories flowed freely. There were impromptu toasts with my father's favorite bourbon. There was even music when someone discovered Grace's old record player and put on the Vietnam-era songs that had formed the soundtrack to my father's youth. Among the guests were not just his old platoon members but younger veterans he had mentored over the years. A captain from the local recruiting office spoke of how Master Sergeant Maxwell had counseled him through the challenges of leadership. A young specialist described how my father had helped her prepare for sapper school, when others had discouraged her from trying. He built bridges, the specialist explained, her eyes bright with admiration. Not just the literal ones in combat zones, but human connections that changed lives. As the evening progressed, Walter clinked his glass for attention. "I think it's time," he said, nodding to his wife, who disappeared into another room. She returned carrying a large shadow box, similar to the military display cases that had hung in my father's office but significantly larger and more elaborate. As she set it on the dining room table, I could see it contained not just my father's medals and insignia, but photographs, handwritten notes, and small mementos spanning his entire career. "We've been working on this since he first got sick," Walter explained. "All of us contributing pieces of Jimmy's story that only we knew. He asked us to finish it for you after he was gone." The shadow box was a masterpiece of personal history, a visual chronicle of my father's life from his earliest days as a fresh-faced private to his retirement ceremony as a respected master sergeant. There were items I recognized from his office collection, but many more I'd never seen before. A worn compass from his first field exercise, a faded patch from a classified mission he'd never discussed, handwritten orders bearing the signature of a general who later became chairman of the Joint Chiefs. "This isn't just a military display," Grace explained softly. "It's the story of who he was beyond the uniform, too." In the center of the arrangement was a small section dedicated to family, a lock of what must have been my baby hair, my mother's military-dependent ID card, a crayon drawing I'd made in elementary school, and photos. So many photos of the three of us together, images I thought had been lost forever. "How did you get these?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Jimmy made copies of everything important," Martinez explained. "After your mother died, he became almost obsessive about preserving memories. Said he never wanted you to forget where you came from." As I studied the shadow box, taking in the careful arrangement that told my father's story more completely than any eulogy could have, I noticed a small envelope tucked into the bottom corner, my name written on it in my father's handwriting. Walter nodded encouragingly. "That's for you to read privately, whenever you're ready." The gathering continued around me, but I found myself drawn to the quiet of Walter's back porch, envelope in hand. Under the glow of string lights and with the distant sound of laughter providing a fitting backdrop, I carefully opened my father's final message. "Elena." It began, the handwriting strong and clear, not yet affected by the weakness of his final days. "If you're reading this, then Walter and the others have kept their promise to make sure you know the full truth. I'm sorry I won't be there to see the woman you continue to become, but I've seen enough to know that you will carry our family's legacy of service and integrity forward in ways that will make me proud." The letter continued, not with regrets or accusations about Vanessa's manipulations, but with hope and guidance for my future. He wrote about the importance of building my own family, whether through blood or bonds of loyalty like those he'd formed with his military brothers. He encouraged me to find joy in my service without letting it consume me entirely. He reminded me that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the bravest act is to allow yourself to be vulnerable with those who have earned your trust. "I've instructed Walter to give you this letter at the right moment," he wrote toward the end. "When you're surrounded by people who knew me as I truly was, not as others might have tried to portray me. Remember this feeling, Elena. This is what matters in the end. Not possessions or positions, but the connections we forge and the impact we have on each other's lives." The letter concluded with a simple declaration. "You were always seen. You were always loved. You are my greatest legacy. Carry that knowledge with you wherever duty takes you. Dad." I folded the letter carefully and returned it to its envelope, allowing the tears to flow freely now. Not tears of grief or anger, but of recognition, of finally understanding the full measure of my father's love and foresight. When I returned inside, the gathering had evolved into what could only be described as a celebration. Someone had found photos from my father's infamous retirement party, and the stories had grown increasingly animated and occasionally ribald. I joined them, contributing my own memories and discovering new sides to the man I thought I had fully known. As the evening wound down, Walter approached with a small wooden box. "One last thing," he said. "Your father wanted you to have this when the time was right." Inside the box was my father's combat infantry badge. Not the display version from his shadow box, but the actual badge he had worn on his uniform through 2 wars. Pinned to it was a small note. "This kept me safe through the darkest days. May it do the same for you." He always said that badge reminded him what was at stake, Walter explained. Not just completing the mission, but getting home to the people who needed him. I closed my fingers around the badge, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic. "Thank you," I said, looking around at the gathering of people who had loved my father enough to ensure his true legacy survived. "All of you, for keeping his story intact." Doc raised his glass in one final toast. "To Master Sergeant James Maxwell. May we honor his memory by living as he taught us, with courage, integrity, and unwavering loyalty to those who matter." "To James," the room echoed. "To Dad," I whispered. The next morning, as I prepared to return to duty, I packed carefully. My father's journals and letters secured alongside my own belongings, the shadow box safely cushioned for transport, the combat infantry badge pinned inside my uniform blouse, close to my heart. Walter and Grace insisted on driving me to the airport, maintaining the conversation on lighter topics until we reached the security checkpoint. "You know," Walter said as we said our goodbyes, "in all my years knowing your father, I never saw him as proud as when he talked about you following in his footsteps. Not just joining the service, but choosing the harder path. Combat engineering, leadership roles, deployment after deployment. He never told me that." I admitted. "He wouldn't," Grace said with a knowing smile. "He didn't want it to seem like pressure. But trust me, when you made Master Sergeant faster than he did, he bragged about that for months." As I turned to go, Walter caught my arm gently. "Elena, whatever comes next, whether it's another tour, a new posting, whatever, remember you've got family now. Not just by blood, but by choice. Your father made sure of that." I nodded, words momentarily failing me. Then I squared my shoulders and did what my father would have done, faced forward and moved toward duty with purpose and pride, carrying his legacy with every step. The 21-gun salute that had marked my father's passing had done more than honor his service. It had announced to the world that Master Sergeant James Maxwell's story would continue through the lives he had touched, the values he had instilled, and the daughter who now carried his badge of courage close to her heart. Not as a burden, but as a blessing. Not as an ending, but as a beginning. 6 months after my father's funeral, I stood at attention in the sweltering Korean sun, watching as General Harris pinned the Bronze Star to my uniform. The award ceremony recognized our engineering battalion's exceptional work constructing critical infrastructure under hostile conditions near the DMZ. As the citation was read aloud, describing how I had led my team through a treacherous night operation to repair a collapsed bridge while under observation from enemy forces, I felt my father's presence as strongly as if he stood beside me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sergeant First Class Maxwell has displayed extraordinary leadership, technical expertise, and courage under fire, upholding the finest traditions of the United States Army Corps of Engineers and the United States Army, the citation concluded. The weight of the medal against my chest felt familiar, a mirror of the one my father had earned decades earlier. As I saluted and returned to my position, I caught a glimpse of something unexpected in the small crowd of observers. A flash of silver hair and a weathered face I recognized immediately. Walter Cooper stood at the edge of the assembly, ramrod straight in a blazer adorned with his Vietnam service pins, offering me a subtle nod of approval. Beside him stood 2 figures I hadn't expected to see again so soon, Doc Simmons and Martinez, similarly attired and beaming with unmistakable pride. After the ceremony concluded, I made my way through the crowd of well-wishers to where the 3 veterans waited patiently. "Surprised?" Walter asked, his eyes twinkling with mischief. You didn't think we'd miss this, did you? How did you even know about it? I asked, genuinely bewildered as I accepted their congratulatory embraces. Martinez grinned. Let's just say we've maintained some useful connections in the Pentagon. When we heard about the award, wild horses couldn't have kept us away. Besides, Doc added, we promised your father we'd be there for the important moments. This certainly qualifies. Later, over dinner at the Officers' Club, they explained that they had coordinated with my battalion commander, himself a mentee of my father from years back, to arrange the surprise visit. They had flown in specifically for the ceremony and would be departing the next day. We bring news from home, Walter said, producing an envelope from his jacket pocket. The Veterans Foundation your father supported. They're using their portion of the house sale proceeds to establish a scholarship program for children of fallen service members. They're naming it after your parents, the James and Laura Maxwell Memorial Scholarship. The unexpected tribute brought a lump to my throat. Dad would have loved that. There's more, Martinez added. Remember that combat photography exhibit you mentioned you wanted to create someday, using your skills to document the engineering work being done in conflict zones? I nodded, surprised he had remembered a passing comment I'd made during our fishing expedition. Well, we've been talking to some people at the Army Heritage Center. They're interested in hosting such an exhibit. Said the intersection of military engineering and documentary photography offers a unique perspective that hasn't been properly showcased before. That would be amazing. I managed, the possibilities suddenly expanding before me. But my deployment? Nobody's saying do it tomorrow, Doc said practically. But when you're ready, the opportunity will be there. We've made sure of it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The conversation shifted to updates about the extended network of my father's friends and colleagues, the community I had inherited. Grace was organizing a veterans' spouses support group. Colonel Harrison had retired and was teaching military history at Georgetown. Even Rebecca, the young specialist my father had mentored through Sapper School, had received a promotion and was following in his footsteps by becoming a training NCO herself. Your father's influence continues to ripple outward, Walter observed. That's the mark of a life well lived, the positive impact that extends beyond your own time. After dinner, as we walked through the base under a canopy of stars, Walter handed me another envelope, this one sealed and marked with my name. From Vanessa, he said simply. My step faltered. Vanessa? How did she? She contacted me about a month ago, Walter explained. Asked if I would pass this along when I saw you next. Said she'd tried sending it directly but wasn't sure if you'd open it. I stared at the envelope, uncertain. The last 6 months had brought healing and perspective. Did I want to reopen old wounds now? You don't have to read it, Doc said gently. Nobody would blame you if you tossed it straight in the trash. But your father believed in facing things head-on, Martinez added. Good or bad, I slipped the envelope into my pocket. I'll decide later. They respected my choice, changing the subject to lighter matters as we completed our evening walk. When we reached the guest quarters where they were staying, Walter placed a hand on my shoulder. One more thing before we call it a night. We've been talking, the three of us. When your deployment ends next year, we'd like you to consider being the guest of honor at the Vietnam Veterans Reunion in D.C. Your father was always a central figure at those gatherings. It would mean a lot to have you there. The invitation was unexpected, but deeply moving. Another thread connecting me to my father's legacy. Another way to ensure his memory remained vibrant and meaningful. I'd be honored, I said sincerely. Later that night, alone in my quarters, I finally opened Vanessa's letter. The handwriting was shaky, less confident than I remembered. Elena. It began without preamble. I don't expect forgiveness, nor am I writing to defend my actions. There is no defense for what I did. Instead, I'm writing because there are things you should know, things I couldn't bring myself to acknowledge until recently. The letter continued, revealing aspects of my father's final months I hadn't been aware of. How he had insisted on recording video messages for me even when the pain medication made it difficult for him to focus. How he had made Vanessa promise to send me his dress uniform with all its insignia intact. How he had spoken of me with pride and love, even as the cancer claimed more of his strength each day. I was jealous, Vanessa admitted bluntly. Of the bond you shared. Of the understanding between you that I could never penetrate. James would light up when he spoke of your accomplishments in a way he never did about anything else. My resentment festered over years until it corrupted everything it touched. My marriage, my relationship with my sons, and most unforgivably, your relationship with your father. She explained that since the reading of the will, she had begun therapy to confront her destructive behavior patterns. Her sons had distanced themselves from her after learning the full extent of her deception. She was selling her remaining assets and moving to Florida to be near her sister, starting over at 63. I've enclosed something that belongs to you, the letter concluded. I found it while cleaning out the last of my belongings from the safety deposit box I maintained, separate from the one your father left you. I have no right to keep it. A small, worn photograph slipped from the envelope, a picture I had never seen before. It showed my father as a young man in his early 20s, cradling a newborn wrapped in a pink blanket. Me. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, James with Elena, first day home. Never seen a man so completely in love at first sight. This simple image, this tangible proof of my father's joy in my existence from its very beginning, affected me more powerfully than all the military honors and commemorations combined. This was not Master Sergeant Maxwell, the decorated soldier, but simply my dad, looking at his daughter with unguarded adoration. I carefully placed the photo beside my bed and picked up my father's journal, which had become my nightly reading. His words had become a compass for navigating my own path forward, his wisdom a continuing presence in my life. 3 days later, I received unexpected orders, temporary duty to Fort Leonard Wood as an instructor for a specialized combat engineering course. The timing was perfect. I had been looking for an opportunity to temporarily return stateside and address the ongoing matters with my father's estate. Upon my arrival in Missouri, I discovered that the timing was not coincidental. Colonel Patterson, the base commander, had specifically requested me for the training rotation. Your father served under me during Desert Storm, he explained during our initial meeting. Best NCO I ever worked with. When I saw your name on the Bronze Star citation, I knew we needed your expertise here. The 3-month teaching assignment proved transformative. Working with new recruits, shaping the next generation of combat engineers, connected me to my father's legacy in yet another meaningful way. I found myself unconsciously using his teaching methods, his phrases, even his distinctive approach to problem-solving. You remind me of an old-school sergeant I trained under years ago, one of the older staff sergeants commented during a field exercise. Maxwell was his name. Toughest instructor I ever had. But damn if I didn't remember every lesson when the shells started falling in Iraq. He was my father, I said simply. The sergeant's eyes widened with recognition. No wonder you've got that same intensity. He's the reason I survived my first deployment. Best compliment I can give you is that your students will be saying the same thing about you someday. During my time at Fort Leonard Wood, I began organizing my father's journals and photographs, working on evenings and weekends to create a coherent narrative of his military career. What had begun as a personal project to preserve his memory evolved into something larger, a potential contribution to the Army Heritage Center's archives, documenting not just one soldier's journey, but the evolution of military engineering through 3 major conflicts. Colonel Patterson took an interest in the project, providing resources and connecting me with the base historian. This kind of first-hand documentation is invaluable, he explained, especially from someone who served at every level from private to master sergeant. Your father's perspective spans decades of military transformation. As the training rotation neared its end, I received an unexpected visitor, Colonel Harrison, my father's friend who had helped ensure I received my rightful place at the funeral. Now fully retired, he had driven from Georgetown to discuss a proposal. The Military History Department is launching a new oral history initiative, he explained over coffee in the base cafeteria. capturing the experiences of enlisted personnel across different eras. We'd like you to consider being involved, not just contributing your father's materials, but perhaps guest lecturing occasionally about the evolution of combat engineering from a practitioner's perspective. The opportunity aligned perfectly with the direction my thinking had been heading, finding ways to honor my father's legacy while forging my own path forward. My current enlistment had another year remaining, but I had been contemplating my next steps. This could be one of them. I'd need to coordinate with my command, I said, but I'm definitely interested. Harrison smiled. Your father always said you had a gift for explaining complex technical concepts in accessible ways. Said you'd make a hell of a teacher if you ever decided to hang up your combat boots. The comment startled me. He said that? I don't remember ever discussing teaching with him. He observed how you worked with younger soldiers during that joint training exercise at Fort Bragg 5 years ago. Told me he could see you had the patience and clarity he always struggled to develop as an instructor. Once again, my father had seen potential in me that I hadn't fully recognized in myself. It was becoming a pattern, discovering ways he had been quietly paving paths for my future, even as his own time grew short. As my temporary duty assignment concluded, I made one final visit to Walter and Grace before returning to Korea. Their home had become a touchstone for me, a place where my father's memory was honored but not enshrined, where stories of him were shared with laughter as often as reverence. We've been going through some of Jimmy's old footlockers, Walter said as we sat on their back porch. Found something we thought you might want to see. He handed me a small leather-bound book that looked different from my father's usual journals. Opening it, I discovered it was a poetry collection, handwritten verses dating back to my father's earliest days in the service. Your dad would probably be mortified that we found these, Grace said with a gentle smile. He always claimed he didn't have a poetic bone in his body. But after particularly difficult missions, especially ones where they lost people, he'd write. Said it helped him process things he couldn't talk about. The poems were raw and unpolished, but powerfully honest, reflections on courage, sacrifice, camaraderie, and the complex emotions of a soldier far from home. I had never imagined my practical, straightforward father expressing himself this way, and the discovery opened yet another dimension of the man I thought I had fully known. There's something else, Walter said, exchanging a meaningful glance with Grace. We've been talking with the group about establishing a foundation in your father's name. Something focused on supporting combat veterans transitioning to civilian life. Using part of the proceeds from his estate that he designated for veterans' causes. That's a wonderful idea, I said sincerely. We'd like you to be on the board, Grace added. Not just as his daughter, but as a serving NCO who understands current military realities. Your perspective would be invaluable. The request represented another thread in the tapestry of connections my father had created, another way his influence continued to shape lives even after his passing. I accepted without hesitation, recognizing that this, too, was part of my inheritance, not just honoring his memory, but actively continuing his work. On my final evening before returning to Korea, I visited Arlington one last time. The setting sun cast long shadows across the endless rows of white headstones as I made my way to my father's grave. In the 6 months since the funeral, the temporary marker had been replaced by a permanent headstone, its inscription simple but profound. James Michael Maxwell, Master Sergeant, United States Army, Vietnam Desert Storm, WOF Bronze Star, Purple Heart, beloved father and mentor. Duty first, always. I placed a small stone on top of the headstone, an ancient tradition signifying that someone had visited, that the deceased was remembered. Beside it, I left a more personal token, a combat engineer's pin from my first unit, identical to the one he had worn in his early years. Hi, Dad, I said quietly, feeling none of the self-consciousness that might once have accompanied speaking aloud at a gravesite. I got the Bronze Star. Just like you. The citation even used some of the same language as yours, something about exceptional courage under fire. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the nearby oak tree, and I continued, sharing updates about my assignment, the teaching position, the foundation being established in his name. I understand now what you were doing all along, I said finally. Building a network that would outlast you, creating connections that would sustain me when you couldn't be here yourself, leaving breadcrumbs for me to follow toward a future you wouldn't get to see. I traced the letters of his name on the cool marble. I won't waste it, Dad. The legacy, the relationships, the opportunities, I promise to use them well. To build something meaningful on the foundation you laid. As I stood to leave, I noticed a small group of uniformed service members visiting a nearby grave, young soldiers probably paying respects to a fallen comrade. One of them glanced my way, noting my own uniform, and offered a respectful nod of solidarity. The simple gesture of recognition between those who serve reminded me yet again of the broader community to which I belonged, another gift my father had given me by encouraging my military path. When I reached the cemetery entrance, I found Walter waiting patiently beside his car. "Thought you might want company for the drive back," he said simply. "How did you know I'd be here?" He smiled. "Where else would you go on your last night? It's what Jimmy would have done." As we drove through the gathering dusk, Walter shared one final story about my father, an account of a training accident early in his career, where he had risked his own safety to rescue two younger soldiers trapped in a collapsed trench. "That was Jimmy in a nutshell," Walter concluded, "always putting others first, always leading from the front. He didn't just teach those values, he lived them every day." "I hope I'm doing the same," I said quietly. "You already are," Walter assured me. "The way you've handled everything these past months, with dignity and determination rather than bitterness. The way you're finding constructive paths forward, instead of dwelling on past injustices." He'd be bursting with pride. The next morning, as my flight to South Korea was called, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me since my father's passing. The funeral that should have been the closing of one chapter had instead become the opening of another, one filled with unexpected discoveries, renewed connections, and promising new directions. The 21-gun salute that had punctuated my father's military honors had indeed been a proclamation, not just of who he had been, but of what continued through me. Each shot had emphasized a truth that Vanessa and her schemes could never erase, that Master Sergeant James Maxwell's legacy was secured not in possessions or legal documents, but in the lives he had touched, and the daughter who carried his values forward. As the plane lifted off American soil, I thought about the journey ahead, completing my current deployment, potentially transitioning toward teaching and preservation of military history, continuing my father's work through the foundation bearing his name. The path was clearer now, illuminated by the examples, relationships, and wisdom he had left behind. They had called me nobody at that funeral 6 months ago. They had tried to render me invisible, to write me out of my own father's story. But the 21-gun salute had spoken louder than their lies. It had proclaimed a truth that no deception could obscure. I was Sergeant First Class Elena Maxwell, daughter of Master Sergeant James Maxwell, carrying forward a proud legacy of service, integrity, and unwavering dedication to what matters most. And no one would ever make me a nobody again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.